I am a lineman for the county, and I drive the main road, searching in the sun for another overload. I hear you singing in the wire, I can hear you through the whine, and the Wichita lineman is still on the line.
Okay, so if you are paying attention to the goings-on in Brazil, which is currently the country with the biggest chance of changing in Latin America, the left is shitting its pants. They literally have to drive down to the corner store and buy a huge pack of Depends because the results from this past Sunday indicate that people are really, I don't know if they want to dismantle socialism, but they definitely want to change from what socialist leaders have given them over the past, well, I think it would be almost 16 years. So this is the real news with our old friend Greggy Wilpert, the husband of the Venezuelan ambassador to Ecuador, talking about the election. I don't know if we'll get through the whole thing. I am going to have to edit this down because it's going to be long. But here we go.
It's the Real News Network, and I'm Greg Wilpert joining you from Baltimore. Brazilians and people around the world who are concerned about the rise of neo-fascism are still in shock about the high percentage of votes, 46.
So just to be clear, Bolsonaro, who is the first place candidate here, earned more combined than the two leading socialists, Fernando Haddad and Ciro Gomes. So they're not happy about it.
6% that Jair Bolsonaro got in Brazil's presidential election last Sunday. The center-left Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad, who had replaced frontrunner Lula da Silva in the last minute, came in second place with 29% of the vote. He will now face Bolsonaro in a runoff vote on October 28th. The day after the election, Haddad tried to give the result a positive interpretation.
We're very excited for the second round of Brazil's presidential election because the second round offers an opportunity that we didn't have in the first round to debate the projects that each one of the remaining candidates advocate for the country. We'll have an opportunity to compare these two projects so that voters have an opportunity, in my opinion, that they didn't have in the first round, of comparison.
Joining me now to analyze the election result in the context of Brazil's recent history is Professor Boaventura de Sousa Santos. He's professor of sociology at Coimbra University in Portugal and a distinguished legal scholar at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His most recent...
Okay, this guy is basically a third worlder, talking a lot about Marxism. He apparently is the founder of the Alice Project, or the director of it. And it says here, within a few months, he had moved from criminal law to criminology. This was back when he was studying in Berlin during the Cold War. Then to the sociology of law, and finally sociology. He became engaged in an authentic process of discovering Marxism. While acknowledging the limits of Marxism, Santos has more recently described Marxism as an ongoing discovery. His PhD thesis was not only a landmark in the sociology of law, but has greatly impacted his own life. His fieldwork was based on participant observation lasting several months in a Rio de Janeiro slum, where he experienced the struggle of the excluded against oppression firsthand as he learned from the wisdom of men and women struggling for subsistence and for recognition of their dignity. I don't know what the hell that has to do with the law. This is basically like the granddaddy of all social justice warriors, in my opinion. I don't even like using that term because it's kind of become a cliche, but this is a person who is more interested in emotional narratives than in actually giving accurate depictions of what's going on. And the first time that I listened to this, I was listening to it at work. They didn't talk at all about actual statistics and economics, and the fact that Brazil is basically in Brazil is basically in a tailspin in many economic respects, or it had been. I think they had a recession in 2016 that contracted the economy by a crazy percentage. I think it was like 7% or something.
Recent book is The End of the Cognitive Empire. Also, he recently returned from Brazil, where he had a chance to visit with Lula da Silva in person. He joins us now from Madison, Wisconsin. Thanks for being here today, Boaventura.
It's my pleasure.
So let's start with your visit with former President Lula da Silva in prison a few weeks ago. As I mentioned, Lula is serving a 12-year sentence for corruption, but he is appealing the conviction on the basis that no material evidence was presented against him. How was his mood? How did you see him? And also, I'm sure you talked about the presidential race, and so how did he see this historical race between Haddad and Bolsonaro?
Well, it was, a tense moment and a very important moment, I'd say, because it's a little bit dramatic. Lula da Silva, as president of Brazil, inaugurated that building where he's now in prison, confined, 11 years ago. And now is there in solitary confinement.
So isn't that sad that you get to suffer in the prison that you opened? Isn't that such a sad fate to suffer?
So he was in very good spirits. He can't leave the room. He has, instruments to exercises and so on. And he is visited by his lawyers. There are some restrictions on other visitors. There have been lots of restrictions. I was surprised that I was allowed. Before me was Martin Schulz, who was for once president of the European Parliament. And each one of us had half an hour with Lula da Silva on that afternoon.
So understand that this revolutionary Lula, supposedly a revolutionary, he is getting visits from one of the EU's top snakes, the European Union, this disgusting enterprise that basically disenfranchises average people and gives all of the decision making to faceless suits over in Brussels. That's who is standing up for Lula. They're basically, the EU, which didn't give a shit about Catalonia. When they were protesting against Spanish oppression, just for holding an unofficial vote. The EU cares about what's going on in Brazil, which isn't an EU member, because they convicted a person who was their president for 8 years for numerous counts of bribery and corruption. So this is really why people have a problem with Lula, or they did, why he basically shat the bed and his successor Rousseff was eventually impeached, because due to his incompetent economic policies and the rampant corruption that resulted, Brazil went through the longest and deepest recession in its history. And this is from NPR. This is not from, Fox News. It isn't from Breitbart. It isn't from, the Epoch Times. It isn't from InfoWars. This is from NPR. This isn't stuff that's up for debate. Brazil's recession was already of historic proportions. Today, government figures confirm that it has grown even worse. The economy last year dipped more sharply than expected. The national gross domestic product contracted by 3.6% in 2016. The numbers for 2015 were slightly worse. So, they want all of the praise and none of the accountability. That's what you can say about people who believe in Marxist economics, of any type. You know, everything is always someone else's fault, even though you handed them that. This is like the person who, you know, you lend them your Honda because they say that they need to drive over to the store to buy some, you know, bleach or something to do their laundry, and then they crash your car and they blame you for not knowing that they were drunk when they eventually took your car out. That's basically what the Marxists are. What Marxists and social, you know, to a certain extent, social democrats also get into this mess. They spend the economy into the red, and they also appoint people into office who have more. You know, they expand the power of the state, but there's no accountability for people that are in these government jobs because they're very often protected, and they have much more of a job security than anybody working in a job elsewhere. So let's keep going.
Afternoon. Well, he was in very good spirits. He's a political activist. He considers himself, of course, and we do also consider him as a political prisoner, probably one of the most.
You're not a political prisoner if you've been convicted of corruption. These are people at the Real News Network that constantly pine and gripe about how people get away with white-collar crimes. And finally, a country convicts a former president of white-collar crimes, and they have this bizarre, you know, angst against it. He was part of one of the biggest corruption scandals, the Odebrecht scandal, which rocked not just Brazil but the rest of Latin America. That was what brought him down. He was a corrupt, graft-ridden leader. Him and Rousseff, and they deserve, you know, frankly, I don't understand how they were even considering letting him run for office, given that.
Most famous political prisoners of the world today. And we were discussing, you know, the political situation. He was asking me about the continent, the situation in other countries, which we know are also undergoing deep crisis, from Venezuela to Argentina. We discussed that. And concerning the Brazilian election, at the time, I was urging him to announce, you know, the person that would replace him, because there were some appeals still pending in the electoral court. Everybody knew that they would confirm that he could not be eligible, and therefore he should replace himself by Haddad as soon as possible, so that the transfer of votes from him to Haddad would occur immediately, and so Haddad would start a campaign in his own name. Lula da Silva decided to delay that a little bit because, in fact, he was really rising in the opinion polls, and therefore the time was in his favor in this regard, in regard of the election. So
let me give you an idea of some of the things that Lula was accused of. So it says here, corruption charges against former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva piled up on Monday as prosecutors accused him and Marcelo Odebrecht, ex-CEO of engineering group Odebrecht SA, in an alleged bribery scheme related to contracts in Angola. So they're basically plundering a third world African country for oil contracts. He's no different. This Marxist is no different than any of the other capitalist schemers that have plundered any of these other countries. There is no difference in what they do, only in how they portray their attitude towards it. So really, we're talking about comparing apples to apples. I would say that what Lula is accused of doing, you know, I don't think he was convicted of this particular crime, but the question is, if this was going on and if Lula was tied to this person, why is the Real News trying to defend these people, which is exactly what they're doing here? This is not an objective piece by any means. Why are they trying to defend this person if he's connected in any way to Odebrecht, which has been basically implicated in corruption schemes all over Latin America, from Peru to, I believe, in Ecuador? I think that there were several cases pending against them. They're basically a South American corruption firm. So the same network, by the way, the Real News, which I get it. Some of you are like, well, why do you keep focusing on them? Well, they give the clearest they give the clearest version of bullshit that you'll see. The clearest version of, oh, we believe Marxists are entitled to do everything that uh, capitalists do, but we're not going to hold them accountable because their heart's in the right place. That's basically their attitude. That's why I think that it's critical that we observe what's going on in Latin America, support the people that could bring positive change there. I can't say for sure that Bolsonaro, if elected, would change the culture there because he's only one person. But we have to start paying attention to Latin America, our most important regional neighbors. You know, whether it is Brazil or Mexico or Colombia or not, well, Paraguay not as much, but these countries are our most important neighbors. You know, Canada is important as well, but it's only one country. Latin America is the rest of the continent, and Brazil would be the second most powerful economy on the continent. I think that they're very close to the GDP level of Canada, if not even higher. So let's keep going here.
He decided to not to designate Haddad as his replacement immediately. But it was a very interesting conversation. The lawyers, of course, he considers himself to be unjustly punished, and he's innocent. He claims his innocence, and he thinks that he's
standing next to a woman who has a shirt on that says "Fight like a girl," and she actually looks like she could probably beat the shit out of him because he's pretty old, short, and over the hill.
Ready to fight in courts forever to prove his innocence. I told him that, unfortunately, this is a kind of
So, by the way, they're going to be talking a lot about racism in this. They will. I've heard this actual video before, but this is a video of him surrounded by a bunch of mostly older white Brazilians in a country that is one of the most diverse in the world. So why aren't people, you know, objecting, saying, well, I mean, I'm sorry, but I mean, I thought that you were the candidate for diversity in Brazil, and yet you're standing around all these people that are basically, they look exactly like you, buddy. You know, these leftists, they're always obsessed with race. So they will bring it up in this video. So I'm bringing it up for them before. So, you know, you guys are ready.
A political situation, and therefore there are many important, apparent crimes that we'll never know who.
Again, very few anybody besides, you know, there's some people that you don't know what race they are, but this is mostly a crowd of white people. There's one black guy in the foreground.
Who killed or who was responsible? So in this case, he's being victimized by complot by the judiciary. It is true. I read the sentence, all the two sentences, the first trial and then the appeal court. There are no real evidence that, in fact, is the owner of that apartment. There may be other cases pending against Lula. We know that.
So this guy is claiming that there's no, you know, his name doesn't appear on the lease or even on the deed for the house. It's not like people have straw owners or straw buyers. That never happens with white collar crimes. By the way, the Real News, they're on, you know, they always criticize the New York Times and mainstream media. They also had a video, which, you know, I'm not going to have time this week to analyze. I don't know if I will analyze it, where they say that Trump likely committed tax fraud when he was a private businessman. We're not talking about look, I think that there's a different ethical culpability for somebody cheating on their taxes when they're a private citizen versus a person who is a public official that's very corrupt. Okay? When you cheat the tax services out of money that they're taking from you, I consider that a virtue. I would say that tax evasion, in my opinion, is basically just being a smart person. Okay, you know, I'm not endorsing people trying to break the law, but tax evasion is a crime that is basically the government saying, you found a way to keep stuff that belongs to you that we think doesn't. Whereas what Lula is accused of is basically taking bribes. That's what real corruption is. What they're accusing Trump of has nothing to do with his time as president. In fact, he's accused of using loopholes. A loophole means that you basically got away with keeping more of your money legally. That perhaps some people would say, "Oh, that's not really nice. How did he get out of that?" Well, maybe if the law was written in a more concrete and firm and uh, consistent way, you wouldn't have it. But they're really expecting him to go down on tax charges for things that are explicitly legal.
Corruption was, prevalent in Brazil, to fund the parties, but enrichment, self-enrichment, and being owner of an apartment, it is not proven in any way. I mean, you need, a title of property. No title, property title has been shown. So I think was very unjust. It feels very deeply that is very, very, very wounded on this. And so we discussed a little bit about that. And I asked him to see that in political terms. But this is a political fight. I think they wanted to get rid of him because he would win the elections if he were a candidate, and they don't want that. That's the coup that started with the impeachment of Dilma, continued with his imprisonment, and would go on. And I think that the results of the election, the first round of the election, shows that the coup is going on.
This is how fucked up people are in the head. These leftists, they complain right and left, well, left and left in the United States about how the popular vote is not really, the popular vote needs to be appreciated, and the electoral college is cheating people out of their. So this is. Damn it. These were the results, okay? In the first round, you know how they were saying that Hillary Clinton won 4 million votes more than Donald Trump in the 2016 election, and therefore she deserves to be president. Jair Bolsonaro in the first round won 17 million votes more than Fernando Haddad. And that really that essentially means, I mean, they should be saying, well, of course he should be president. They're not going to do that because really it's a semantic argument that only applies when when they are the ones that are being wronged. And you can see in these states, this is actually a more dominating result, if you're talking about statewide results, than any of the elections in the past. If you're talking about popular vote, I would say I think one of Lula's elections was more. It was more dominating. If you're talking about the popular vote, but if you're talking about statewide votes, Bolsonaro won by a much larger margin. And you can see this; these are the first round winners, and Haddad didn't even win the one state up in the north that he was supposed to. He lost this state over these. A lot of these states are ones that normally the PT would be winning. You see here in that election, they won both this state and that state. Now in the first round, I don't know if they're going to have the results. Yeah, I think this is only the second round result. But I would say that it's very likely that in the second round, Bolsonaro, if the voting is not tainted, if the voting is not tainted as much as they would like to, he will probably win that election.
So I want to turn.
But they want to call it a soft coup. That's what I wanted to say. They want to call that a soft coup. That the person that had been the corrupt president who oversaw basically the bulldozing of slums in order to build World Cup stadiums and Olympic facilities, that person is the person who suffered from the soft coup because Congress decided to use the constitutional powers to impeach them. And in fact, this is the same person. See, this is the Boaventura de Souza Santos, who was talking about Dilma Rousseff being basically a fake progressive back in 2013. So it says the difficulty in the boasting a positive international image created by President Lula da Silva's social inclusion policies, this developmentalist Brazil has come across in the eyes of the world as a novel, benevolent, inclusive type of power. Thus, the international community couldn't be more surprised when, over the last week, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets of the country's major cities in order to demonstrate. While Turkey's recent demonstrations were promptly explained away in terms of the two Turkeys interpretation, it has proved more difficult to recognize the existence of two Brazils. Nevertheless, there it is before our own eyes. The difficulty in recognizing the latter phenomenon lies in the very nature of the other Brazil, which tends to defy simplistic analyses. It is made up of three narratives and temporalities. The first is the narrative of social exclusion in one of the world's most unequal countries, of the land-owning oligarchies, of violent bossism, which is kakikismo, which means, well, that literally is what it means, bossism, and of small racist political elites. It goes back to colonial times and has replicated itself in ever-changing shapes to this day. The second narrative is that of the claim for participatory democracy. It has been around for 25 years, its most salient moments being the constitutional process leading to the 1988 Constitution, the participatory budgets on urban policies taking place in hundreds of municipalities, President Collor de Mello's 1992 impeachment, and at that time when Collor de Mello was a little more of a liberal, not so an economic liberal, a little more pro business. When he was impeached, they never called it a soft coup. The socialists will never call it a soft coup when somebody who disagrees with their vision of the economy gets impeached. That's why they are basically, there's no way to actually reason with them, because they are like crusading fanatics. That's my opinion. And for people who say, well, there's people like that on the right, you're damn right there's people like that on the right. And that's why this is a mirror image. This is why I believe that you do need to emphasize devolution, keep government at the lowest level possible, keep people who are these lunatics from reaching a level where they are in charge of nations of hundreds of millions of people, like in Brazil. That's really it has nothing to do with any of these other things of class, race, gender, and everything. That I think is complete bullshit. If you give people the right to make decisions at the lowest level possible, I don't think things devolve to the level of corruption and dishonesty that you see here.
To that election, what is your interpretation of Bolsonaro's win of 46% of the vote? He only needs now 4% more in order to win the second round for the presidency on October 28th, and it seems quite possible at this point. How do you see what is happening in Brazil, and how do you see this turn towards neo-fascism in the larger context of political developments around the world?
Oh, he had to throw it in. A person who is basically succeeding electorally, who says something I don't agree with, is a neo-fascist.
I mean, after all, Bolsonaro is being compared to Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines, Erdogan of Turkey, and Trump in the U.S. How does this election fit in that context as well?
Well, I think very much that we are in a kind of a reactionary cycle around the world. We see that also in Europe, in some countries in Europe, in Poland and Hungary. We see that the extreme right is rising as a kind of a global movement at this stage. We know that Steve Bannon, for instance, is now based in Europe, and he has an organization called Movement based in Brussels and also in Rome, in which he's trying, in fact, both at the secular level and also at the religious level, for instance, to work on this extreme right type of politics. For instance, the resignation of the Pope is within the horizon of this extreme right in Europe, and Steve Bannon is part of it. But Steve Bannon is the front desk guy of all this movement. It's a much deeper movement.
So listen which example he throws in, that the resignation of the Pope is part of Steve Bannon's goals. They're calling that a bad thing. The Pope, who has turned his back on auditing all of the rape and disgusting sexual crimes within the church, that is what he's calling a problem. Are you shitting me? Are you out of your fucking mind? And you're gonna blame that on Steve Bannon? This is something I wanted to throw this in. Okay, this is from a clip of Steve Bannon that I was watching earlier. His interview with Sargon. Yeah, he's doing a lot of interviews today, and the point I'm trying to make is that these people, they have made Steve Bannon great again. That's what they did. Steve Bannon, I'll tell you what, when he started coming onto the scene and he was Trump's campaign manager, I wasn't very excited. I thought, he's a pretty, I didn't believe any of the media crap that was said about him, but I didn't think there was anything special about him, and I still don't think he's an amazing political thinker. I think he's pretty intelligent. If you watch this interview, I will put it in the links. He shows that he has a very deep appreciation for Renaissance and Enlightenment thinking, talking about Prince Henry the Navigator and how people get stuck in these, the earth is flat mindsets and everything. I think he does say a lot of intelligent things, but they basically built Steve Bannon into the giant Godzilla monster that's destroying the city, because they claim literally every problem that's going on. He's the new Koch brothers, okay? He's actually the anti-Koch brothers. So now that the Koch brothers aren't nearly as powerful as they used to be, they have to find a new Koch brothers, and that's...
Film reviewers. It hasn't gone to the general public yet. They're eviscerating the guy without talking about the film itself. Yeah. 9 times out of 10, they're sitting there saying, hey, you had the devil for 16 hours or 20 hours, why is the devil still alive? So they kind of missed the point of all of this, I think.
Okay, I like the way you're framing that, yourself as the devil, because in their worldview, I think that's really accurate. Because, I don't want to just say it's effectively nationalists versus globalists, but ultimately that is the schism, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think that's too simplistic. No. Too simplistic. I think the world in the post-world, the post-World War II, this kind of liberal, what they call the liberal rules-based order, which I kind of say has now become a fetish, is something that's just kind of built on this momentum, and you have a certain group of what I call the Party of Davos, which is this scientific manager.
So basically what Steve Bannon is glossing over there, saying really in brief, is that they have basically built him up to be the devil himself and empowered him. People, you have to understand, this is the same way that Howard Stern became successful, how Jerry Springer became successful, how Marilyn Manson became successful. And those were people who would anger, kind of right-wing conservative listeners, people that were pro-clutchers and everything, because they would say, how can you have Marilyn Manson influencing the minds of young people? And that's basically what they've done with Steve Bannon. I think I'm going to cut this one short and do a second video for the rest of what's going on here, talking more specifically about Bolsonaro. But please like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment when it uploads, and also, what was the last one? And share the video. So take it easy.
I know I need a small vacation, but it don't look like rain. And if it snows, that stretch down south won't ever stand the strain. And I need you more than want you, and I want you for all time. And the Wichita